What's
Uh,
just the what's the order of speakers just before we?
the order, I think you're the third speaker. We have former Democratic Congressman Jim Moran to be the first one, and then I think it's they sending me the list to
Okay.
the Mustafa, please send me the list of how the order of the speaker, please, if you don't mind. Mustafa بعت لي الليسته بتاعت الترتيب.
Okay, okay, I will.
All right. Okay, so should we start, Mustafa, right now?
Yes.
Okay, all right. First of all, my name is Mohammed Ismail. I'm the coordinator for Egyptians Abroad for Democracy. I live in the United States since 1996. I'm an MBA. I have my own business in the diamond business. I'm a human rights activist since 2013, since the military coup took place. And I'm here trying to go do advocacy, write letters, and I was actually in Rabaa Square. I have witnessed the massacre, not the massacre. I witnessed 2 or 3 massacres before the final one, before the dispersal of Rabaa Square. Our group did too many things. One of them is the Operation Surly lawsuit case against the government of France and Egypt, that they killed the people on the border between Egypt and Libya, and the reason this one came out to the public because the Disclosed talked about it when the police or the group that worked with the French intelligence talked about that we're not killing terrorism, we're actually killing civilians, Egyptian innocent. So and when the French government didn't do anything, they leaked it to Disclose, and nobody, after 2 or 3 months, nobody did anything. They closed the subject, and then this is when we stepped in and we start to do the lawsuit case, and it's very powerful right now. We had Code Pink partner with us in that case, and we'll keep going. We live abroad. We have freedom. We don't take our freedom for granted or democracy. So we're gonna keep pushing until Sisi get out of Egypt, or be, and actually not just get out. He will be in a trial, fair trial, and this is our goal. Anyway, this is just a brief about Egyptians Abroad for Democracy, and a little bit about myself. But I will go ahead and start with former Congressman Jim Morone, member of the U.S. House of Representatives. I would please ask you to introduce yourself. And we wanted to talk about the COP27. The international community is giving another credibility, green light to Sisi. How the people look at it, they're giving green light to General Sisi to keep killing the people of Egypt, torture, rape, name it, by giving him a credibility to host one of the biggest summit in the world. So would like to see what we can do. How can we get the international community really take a solid step against that regime, not just condemn and give here word and there. I'm sure it has to be mutual benefit. It has to be interest. It has to be for the best interest of America. I know human rights usually is not, it's only a tool, but when it comes to politics, we have to have an interest to put pressure on Egypt. We need your opinion. So we have 5 to 7 minutes max. Go ahead, Congressman.
Well, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Of course, I agree with you, and that's why I'm privileged to be part of this presentation that you've put together. It's a good thing to have COP27. It's not a good thing for the Sisi government to be hosting it. That is an honor to bring the heads of states of so many countries together to talk about such a critical issue. But again, it gives credibility to General Sisi. And I prefer to call him general because he's continuing to act like the general of a military that led a military coup. I'm afraid, though, that as long as he has the backing of the Israeli government and the Israeli lobby in the United States, there's going to be inadequate attention given to the repression that is taking place throughout Egypt. Thousands of people have been imprisoned. The U.S. did release money to Egypt when 500 of those prisoners were released, but I'm sure those cells were immediately filled by more political dissidents. And of course, when we call them dissidents, these are people that are standing up for the very rights that the US and Europe take for granted, for democracy, for rule of law, for basic respect for human rights, women's rights, and of course, freedom of the press, which doesn't exist in Egypt. There are some egregious cases where people simply stated their mind or asked questions that caught the Egyptian government's attention, and they were jailed without any kind of due process. It's unacceptable. It's in many ways, it's just despicable what's taking place in the great country of Egypt. But unfortunately, there are not enough people and groups like yours that are bringing the kind of worldwide attention that needs to be brought to this. There was a decent article in the Washington Post. I think it was a couple of days ago. The New York Times is covering it, but it's not going to be front page material until we can get the U.S. government or government about it. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, it's not me. I think someone opened the mic.
Okay.
Mustafa, I think, can you, at the background, Mr. Mustafa, can you control the mics, please? Muted everybody if you can.
Okay.
Go ahead. Okay, thank you.
So
go ahead, Congressman.
We have one particularly egregious case where an articulate person is and an impassioned advocate for democracy and human rights is starving himself to death. His family knows that. Anybody that is paying attention to what's going on is aware of that. But I think the Egyptian government still thinks that it can act with impunity. I'm not sure how we prevent that. They say, well, look, this is all about terrorism. When there was democracy, Mohammed Morsi brought in the Islamic Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, the people around the world don't want that. You're giving it over to extremists, etc. I'm not going to go into all that issue, but they say we are the alternative. We're modern. We want to trade with the rest of the world. We want to be part of the Western world, and compared to MBS and to some extent MBZ, Egypt is a preferable alternative. But what is happening is unacceptable. We should not allow it to be swept under the rug, so to speak, and that's what's happening largely. The Cop27, though, is an opportunity for some people to be able to speak their mind with the protection of the United Nations, and some have been able to do that. I'm glad they're taking advantage of that. I'm glad you're working really in concert with those courageous people in Egypt who are taking advantage of the fact that the United Nations has brought all these people together at Sharm el-Sheikh, and they're using it as a platform to expose the brutality of the Sisi regime. So I'm happy to respond to any questions. I served 24 years in the U.S. Congress. In many ways, I worked with Code Pink, but Code Pink is not the mainstream of the Congress or the American public. They get out front. That's their purpose. But this issue has to be embraced by more of the mainstream in Congress and in the American public. It's a big issue. Egypt is considered an ally, except for people like Senator Leahy, who have been terrific on this in terms of holding back some of the money that we give them. Nevertheless, the Congress agreed to give 90% of the normal foreign aid money we give to Egypt without any contingency. So with a blank check, basically. And that's wrong. It should be, give a blank check to 10%, but put contingencies on 90% to uphold the rule of law and to abide by the most fundamental principles that govern our country. But they did just the opposites. And unfortunately, aside from Senator Leahy and a few others, Congressman Malinowski, who terrible loss in the Congress. He just lost his seat to someone who will not be an advocate for human rights the way Tom was. But we don't have enough people in the Congress, frankly, and we have too much influence on the part of people who recognize that giving money to Egypt is kind of a cover for what we're doing for the right-wing government now, Netanyahu government in Israel. We've done it. We've supported Egypt and Israel in tandem since the Sadat agreement, and I'm afraid we're going to continue to unless there's some kind of pivot point. And I'd like to think that this Cop27 summit could be a pivot point, but I'm not optimistic. I'd be happy to respond to any questions that you might have, or if it's specific issues that you'd like me to be responsive to.
Okay. First of all, I just want to make it clear I'm only to the Egyptians Abroad for Democracy and very much moderating today. We're not the one who did that event. Mustafa Azab and his team from Europe. So just want to make sure they get the credit for it. Yes, and also Senator Murphy, and I just want to add to what you said, Senator Chris Murphy and Congressman Ted Lieu, they're doing an awesome job too when it comes to Egypt. Yes,
they are. Chris and Ted are fabulous, and actually Senator Murphy chairs the Middle East subcommittee on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Hopefully, yes. As a result of the Democrats doing a little better than we thought on Tuesday, he will continue to chair that subcommittee. Chris Murphy is terrific, and he deserves tremendous support. I wish he could get more support from those members of the Egyptian diaspora, for example, in the United States, that should be fighting alongside what the activists in Egypt are trying to accomplish. But Chris is wonderful, and Ted Lieu is terrific, and there are other people like them,
yes.
And I just hope we can. They have the kind of platform they need to change our policy. So right now, our policy is not acceptable, and as far as I'm concerned, the Biden administration has not stood up tall enough against the Sisi regime for what they would consider to be real politic reasons.
Yes, and actually, here that Cop27 turn against the General Sisi. He tried so hard to bring it to host it in Egypt, and now he exposed himself. So it did work for human rights very well. So anyway, for the if anybody has question for Congressman, please go ahead and send it to Mustafa Azab on the chat, and he will send it to me, and I will ask. And we have the second speaker here. I'm getting them up. Just give me 1 second, if you don't mind here. The second person is, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, Qaid Omar, member of the UK Labour Party. If I said the name wrong, please correct me. And go ahead and present yourself, introduce yourself to the people. Go ahead, unmute yourself, please. And you have 5 to 7 minutes. And for the time being, any question?
Good evening to everybody, and thank you for hosting me. And I've listened carefully to Senator Jim Moran and to yourself, Salama. Basically,
Mohammed Ismail. Salma is the name of my business.
Ismail, thank you. And just want to say it's really good to have a summit about the Cop27 in the Middle East and in Egypt. I think it's about time that an Arab country organize such an international summit about a very important issue. It's a concern for the whole world that the greenhouse effect, the temperature is rising, the use of fossil fuel, the dependency on carbon, protecting the ozone, and protecting the environment, and also protecting humanity, and helping the whole world to manage this crisis. This year alone, in the summer, we have faced a very hot summer in the UK, and it was very hot also in Europe. And there has been some concerning signs of lack of rain, and also I think the sea level has increased all over the world. This would endanger sea life species, and also would make it very difficult for people who are not used to hot weather to climatize. And the climate change is a big issue in the wake of the war between Russia and Ukraine, and the rise of cost of living, the rise of cost of energy. The whole thing was dependent on countries engaging and cooperating with each other, the biggest industries basically changing their systems, relying on environment-friendly machineries, etc. And with the cost of living and the costs rising, and the petrol and energy crisis, I think it's going to become more challenging for countries to achieve their goal of zero emission. And I believe that this summit was very, very important to take place after the summit that took place in Scotland, in the UK, and to continue the efforts being made to help the environment all over the world. Now, I don't understand why there was a focus on other issues, and the attention was diverted from focusing on climate change and the issues that are specific and specialist in that area, into a human rights debate about certain cases that are in Egypt, or in the Middle East, or in some of the developing countries. I think you cannot expect such countries to be perfect. And I think it's one step in the right direction that Arab countries and countries in the Middle East stepping up to the challenge, and hosting such a massive, big events like United Nations countries gathering there, trying to resolve some of the problems. Equally, I'm so pleased that Qatar is also organizing the World Cup, which is about to start in about 10 days' time. And this is something to be proud of as well. I'm happy to take questions. I do have a master's in human rights and democratization as well. I am originally from Palestine, and I'm very engaged in the British politics. I'm a member of the Labour Party as well. So I like to focus on the positive side rather than be critical today.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's fine. I'm sure we'll take a lot of questions for you at the end, but I just wanted to give a comment. You said you're original
I
from
would rather if you
Palestine.
ask me now, because I'm about to dash. I've got another interview.
Okay.
to go to.
Okay. Well, that's fine. Well, I'm just personally wanted to. You said you're originally from Palestine, and you know very well about human rights, and you have a master's degree in that. What's shocking me right now, and plus you are a member of UK Labour Party, to be honest, as a personal Egyptian American person, I'm shocked, to be honest, and I'm be frank with you, to hear that from you, with the background you talk about. How come we have, you're asking why is shift from climate change to human rights? How come a country, a president, that he's killing the human rights and doing anything it takes in his hand to stay in power, 60,000 plus prisoners, murdering, rape to stay in power. And at the same time, he's hosting the COP27. It's the normal thing not to have this event in Egypt. But once we're going to have it in Egypt, let's take an opportunity to put our priorities. Our priority is human rights to save the people before to save the climate. So when you talk about Palestinian in UK, like as I said, that your position and all that, I was expecting you when you start talking, focus on how we can use COP27 to save the people of Egypt, that they would like to hear a word from you as well when it comes to that point. So that's my concern as Egyptian American, not as a moderator.
Yes, but allow me to respond to you. Thank you very much for your comments. I didn't come to this show to criticize any country, and I'm an analyst. I'm not talking here as a politician. I don't have an agenda towards any country that is involved, and I'm entitled to my opinion. And basically, I'm here to talk about climate change and about environment. I'm not talking about politics here.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll take next, if there's a question, just stay with us for 5 minutes, please. I ask people if they have any questions, they will ask you. Dr. Maha Azam, this is then after that, Sarah Flounder. Dr. Maha Azam, Chair of Egyptians for Democracy. She is based in UK. Please introduce yourself, and you have 5 to 7 minutes talk max, please. Go for it.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, and thank you for the invitation to join this very important panel. I would like to start by saying that we face a major threat as humanity in regards to the whole issue of climate change. But the issue of climate change and the necessary pressure that needs to be put by societies all over the world requires freedom. It requires freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. And I will, on this occasion, refer to the previous speaker, the member of the Labour Party, and say that in reality, climate justice is inextricably linked to the issue of open and active civil society. Of course, our priority, and that is my emphasis throughout COP27 and before it and after it, is that all countries, all societies are required to take action to ensure as much as possible that we save this world. But in order to do so, we need to mobilize millions across the world. Why do we need to mobilize millions? Because we need to ensure that governments are held accountable. Imagine what the previous speaker said in regards to the UK or the US or any democratic country. Is he proposing that civil society does not pressure and hold its government accountable for what it does or does not do regarding climate change? What we're asking is for Egyptians to be free, for the activists in prison to be free, for the 60,000 political dissidents that did not have a fair trial to be free. Not only because of their political opinion, which of course is a priority, but because given the challenge that we face today, we need activists, we need NGOs, we need people with who are experts and non-experts to hold the government accountable. The Egyptian regime, like others across the world, has made major mistakes in regards to the environment, and it can't be held accountable. It is not held accountable in the arena of politics, in the arena of corruption, in any kind of arena. Essentially, someone who writes a blog can be picked up and thrown in prison. Someone who writes an article will be picked up. In this environment in which we face a major challenge as humanity, We need journalists to be free to speak out. We need civil society to organize meetings and speak out. We don't have this in Egypt. And we want to ensure that in the country where COP is being held today, that the dictator, the general, does not play the old games that he has been playing for 9 years since the coup. And that is to try to ensure that he gains time and continues his dictatorial policies. He has done so through different means, saying that there is going to be a strategy for human rights. He's done through calling for a national dialogue. And he's done so now through, in a sense, hosting or being allowed to host Cop27. And voices across the world are saying, no, we know what's happening. Even governments, democratic governments know what's happening in Egypt. But our request here today is to say, you're not doing enough. We need to speak out louder, but we need governments, democratic governments need to use serious leverage and conditionality in terms of their relationship with Egypt. Egypt is doing harm not only to its own people by the lack of freedoms and repression that continues, but it is doing harm to humanity at large, because 100 million people in Egypt today live in a republic of fear. They live in a big prison. They are afraid to speak. They're afraid to assemble. And assembly and freedom is key in our fight, our worldwide fight to protect the environment and to protect human rights. I'm going to stop here, Mohammed, because I think there are lots of questions that can be asked. There are issues we can debate. And maybe if we could do that once, either after I finish now or when you see appropriate, once all the speakers have spoken. Thank you very much.
Yes. I've already been getting some question on WhatsApp, but I hope the question to come to the chat right here for the speakers to see it. Some people send me a question in Arabic as well. So it seems like this is, I think it's going stream because I'm getting the question outside here too as well. But anyway, we will go with, thank you, Dr. Maha. We'll definitely have more questions and comments. We go to Sarah Flounder. She's a very good friend of mine. We coordinate together. She's from International Action, and she's also she's American political writer and member of the Secretarial of Workers World Party. So please, Sarah, introduce yourself, and I'm honored to be a friend of yours. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mohammed. And thank you for all that you do, because having a voice that coordinates and helps us move forward is very important. First, I want to recognize and salute the heroic contributions to human rights, to peace, and to justice made by Egyptians at the cost of their own lives under threat of torture and imprisonment. Countless people have spoken out against a brutal Sisi dictatorship in Egypt, and especially those this week within the Cop27 International Conference who raised the name of political prisoner Alaa Abdel Fattah, who is on food and now a water strike. Every day matters. The Raqqa massacre is burned into the memory of the whole world, and it marked the Sisi regime as a terrorist regime. So we want to recognize the thousands who were killed defending human rights. They must be remembered, and remembered at this international gathering. Now, the movement for peace and justice in Egypt today faces an enormous challenge. The Cop27 meeting is taking place at the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, so far from the huge cities of Egypt. The government delegations from most of the world's countries, as well as leaders from non-governmental organizations, civil societies, and major businesses are gathered there. And I want to say, in my opinion, we see really a cynical display of what many are calling greenwashing. Great speeches, but there's no plan for financial aid to developing countries who are experiencing the front line effects of a warming planet. There's no plan, no real plan for them. Everyone talks about it, raises some numbers, and then moves on to a conference the next year. Rights groups and international organizations are ignoring, in holding this meeting, Egypt's appalling human rights record, including the detention of tens of thousands of political prisoners. Human rights and climate justice are connected, and we have to make that connection. And those who spoke out at Cop27 are making that connection. You can't talk about climate justice without talking about human rights. Now, this conference where world leaders and international organizations, really, they come there to see and be seen. It is for them a photo op, but they expect nothing to come of this grand display in a burning world. That's why they're silent, really, in doing anything on climate, and they're also, for the most part, silent on human rights, really, even in the host country where they're meeting. What could be easier for them to lift their little finger to mention it? Now, at this International Conference on Climate Summit, carbon is a focus. And every country that's meeting knows that the biggest polluter on the planet today is the US military. It's the elephant in the room. But by agreement, ever since the Kyoto Accords 30 years ago, 1992, that committed state parties to reduce greenhouse emissions, there was also an agreement that US military would never be included in the calculations. All US aircraft, US jets, US aircraft carriers and submarines and destroyers, 800 US military bases around the world, US NATO training missions and war games and drills. Everything to do with the US military is exempt from all calculations. So how honest, how accurate is this meeting discussing how to move forward? The protests globally were very important, including in Washington, D.C., and most important, the protests in Sharm el-Sheikh. In concluding, I want to say that there should be real fear when there's no solution to problems that are presented, and they're presented to the whole world. We should also address, though, the real problems in Egypt today, along with human rights, the inflation that's out of control, the grain prices, the cutbacks in every social program. The Sisi government's role in COP27 is cynical. This is a dictatorship. And really moving forward in this hosting this conference, there should have been first a release of political prisoners as the most basic demand. Of course, I can never say that without acknowledging that my own country, the US, has the largest number of prisoners in the world, more than 2.3 million people in US prisons. So we need to recognize the role that prisons play. It is horrendous. I think I want to say that the way forward is always to link the political and the economic demands, to always remember the bread and butter issues, to demand the bread subsidy, to demand linked to the right to speak and to organize for millions of working people, not only for the academics, not only for the journalists, but for working people themselves to organize and raise their demands. Egypt actually has the oldest recorded workers' strike in history, more than 3,000 years ago. Demonstrations to demand grain payments. Very interesting. And that history has moved forward in demanding the right to eat, the right to live, the right to speak. There's 60,000 prisoners in Egypt today, and they must be released. We have to speak of saving the world and saving the people of Egypt. Climate change is an immediate problem. It's a real problem, and it needs climate justice, and justice always means human rights. The people must be mobilized to demand the right to eat and the right to live free. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Sarah Plund. I always enjoy your speech anywhere I go. And thank you for being part of the last letter that we sent it to President Biden. I went yesterday to make sure that it's delivered, and we also sent it to the State Department. The main thing we wrote in that letter to at least make the visit of President Biden conditional to free the 60,000 plus political prisoners. The least we can do, it's bad enough that he's hosting the biggest international summit in Egypt. So at least let's take an advantage of that international event and try to free the prisoners. So thank you for everything you're doing, Sarah, and please stay with us here. That I'm sure we're gonna have some questions at the end. So let's move to the next person. It's gonna be Mr. Iyad. Mr. Iyad Afalqa. He is the president of Emirates. I don't know if I'm pronouncing right. So of California Democratic Council. And please correct my pronunciation if I said it wrong. So please introduce yourself, and you have 5 to 7 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, good evening, everyone. Yes, you did a very good job with pronouncing my name. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this forum. As someone who has spent most of his career fighting for human rights, and someone who experienced human rights abuses, as someone who was born under Israeli military occupation, I could have the empathy for our sisters and brothers who are political prisoners around the world, and particularly in Egypt. Now, in terms of the letter that was sent to President Biden, that was a very good step in the right direction. However, I'm not holding that much of accountability on the part of the United States to the human rights violation, and that has been translated in the recent visit of President Biden to Saudi Arabia a couple of months ago, and we tried to make it conditional about making sure Saudi Arabia acknowledged the murder of the Saudi journalist Adnan Khashoggi. Despite that, unfortunately, all these demands from us as politicians and people who are in the legislation, it did not work in the way we wanted to. President Biden, he went to Saudi Arabia, and with one thing in mind, which is securing the oil and bringing the prices of fuel down here in the United States. And there was very brief mention of the murdered journalist Adnan Khashoggi. So it was kind of a disappointment for us, although I am from the party that the president from, but me and long other people in the party, we do value human lives, and that's part of the mission that we became part of the Democratic Party. I became involved in the Democratic Party not just to elect Democrats. I got involved in the Democratic Party to make this world a better place for everyone, including the oppressed around the world, because we are very famous as a nation that we have been going and policing a lot of other countries and lecturing them about human rights violation. However, now since the election, the midterm election here in the United States, it just ended. The results are coming out. So this is right timing for this letter. And the reason being because, as you know, these issues affect the outcome of the elections. Now, there is no worry for the Democrats, or there's no excuse for us as Democrats to say, well, let's not focus on what is going on the international arena. Having said that, it is very important for us as activists and as community builders within the Democratic Party is to partner with organizations that are in alignment with our values, because as a Democratic Party, we are the party of the people. As we claim, we are not the party of the corporation, as the previous administration was doing. So, having said that, I hope President Biden does the right thing to move us in the right direction as a country in the United States and as a leader in the world. The content of the letter, it was very strong, and it shows so much of care about how the United States should be viewing itself and how should exert its effort and its weight as a leader in the world. As you know, Egypt receives a lot of the military aid from the United States, and this is something I am against. However, there's also some humanitarian aid goes to Egypt. So I won't ask the president to make it conditional for the humanitarian aid. However, I strongly agree with we need to stop arming people who are dictators around the world, because that's a double standard on our part. If we are enabling these dictators, while on the other hand, we are asking other countries to adopt our democracy. And the reason why I say our democracy, because we want everybody to go according to our measures and our frame of discourse, but that is not supposed to be. And the reason why we should let people decide on who they want to represent them as sovereign nations, and we should not intervene in any of these conflicts. However, since we house the United Nations and we have the United Nations for human rights, we should lead by example and making sure there is the dictators and the oppressive regimes, they should know that we do care about the human rights by making sure that we are not giving them a blank check. Because what we are doing right now, we are giving these oppressive regimes like the regime in Egypt, we are giving them a blank check, telling them you could do anything you want. We don't care what you do to your people. But, you know, we had some Egyptian American activists, they were detained. And like Mohammed Sultan, he went on a hunger strike for a long time. And with the pressure from the State Department, with the pressure from the White House, and something a lot of people, they don't know, it is the activism and organizing of the community here as Arab Americans, as Muslim Americans, as Egyptian Americans as well. So to conclude this letter, I hope we have more of this letter going, because it is about how much our leaders, they hear from us. It is not what we do on silos. So it's very important for us to build these coalitions. It's very important for us to have these strategic relationships between organizations like yours and organizations here on the ground in the United States. I am thrilled and honored that I am speaking after your earlier speaker, because my mindset and my values speak to what she was talking about. So as a Democratic Party, we do care about the human rights, and we need to stop this human rights violation here, because we do have some political prisoners within the United States from our own, and we want to make sure as Democrats that we are
responsive said everybody has to sign. So I told him that.
Mohammed, Mustafa, can you mute? Someone talk on the background. Mustafa, can you mute that, please? Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
No
sorry,
problem.
yeah,
I thought
Mr.
my
Riyad.
time. I thought my time is up, so that's why, like,
Yeah.
I paused for a minute. But thank you very much. So I was in my conclusion, which is as elected executive board member of the California Democratic Party, which is the largest party in the nation. Me and my colleagues, we make sure we bring these issues to the attention of the elected in our Congress. Just to give you a little bit of information, what does it mean to be an executive board member of California Democratic Party? It is not something it's given, it's something earned. I had to run for elections. We only have 300 executive board member. That's including the senators of the state, the congressmen of the state, and one of the people that I sit on the same table with is Nancy Pelosi, who is the Speaker of the Congress, which is translated in other countries in the world. So she is the president of the Parliament of the United States, if we can make that analogy. So I hope that we have enough pressure, since now the midterm elections is behind our back. I hope that we can live to our values, and I hope that President Biden will leave a legacy as a fighter for human rights here and abroad. So far, he has been listening to us as leaders in the party. However, as you know, there's always a pressure from the outside lobbying entities who try to influence the direction that we are going. It is a tough battle. The struggle continues, and human rights are on my mind all the time. And climate change is a human right. We have to fight for climate change, because if our sisters and brothers around the world, they are suffering from the consequences of some of the actions that we do in terms of increasing the emission and also not having enough regulations. I'm one of the lucky ones that I live in a state with the 5th largest economy in the world, and we have the toughest regulations about climate change and going towards the renewable energy. And more importantly, we have one of the most diverse population in the United States. So we are kind of the voice for the voiceless. We are the one who challenge the status quo and speak truth to power. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that you gave me this opportunity to be among you and fighting the fight, and the struggle continues. Thank you.
Thank you, yeah, thank you very much. Right now, we're Dr. Shaheen. Is he there or Mustafa? Is Dr. Shaheen there? Okay.
No, no, no.
Go ahead and take some questions, and then after that, if anybody has comments, we'll take it, and then after that, we end the conference. I think Congressman Jim is going to be coming back, according to what Mustafa said. He just had an interview on the TV, and he's coming back. But the first question is from Ihab on the chat. The question is to Jim and Sarah Plounder. Thanks a lot for your attendance and support. It means a lot to us. But when we are going to see the day, when are we going to see the day where the U.S. government and U.S. president taking real action to suspend at least all kind of military aid to Egyptian regime? Who's authorized to take that decision? So since the congressman is not here, Sarah Flounder, go for it, and then we'll go for the question after that. You have 2 minutes to answer, please.
Well, I wish I could tell you that that day was coming soon, but I think it will take real and substantial demands of people here in the US to demand accountability from their government rather than endless wars. And this is something that both political parties pursue. They will vote the largest military budget in human history, and at the same time make speeches for human rights and climate justice and not do anything about it. So it will take real people's movements that are stronger. We could see this, how many Democratic politicians, Congress people run on a platform that they will reorient the economy away from war and toward people's needs. And yet, when they have a seat in Congress, every single one of them votes the military budget. They will vote $50 billion in a blink to Ukraine, and yet we still don't have a health program for the population here. So these are real problems, and we see the same thing internationally. I think we need a stronger movement coming from below that makes demands on those that we elect, because they listen in terms of being able to focus their agenda, focus their campaign literature, but it's not what they do when they're sitting in Congress. And that is a problem. It's a big problem. And its impact around the world. We see its impact in the US today, where infrastructure is collapsing and the rights of people to make demands are also being severely restricted. So at any rate, I want to say it's a long struggle, but as everyone who is organizing in Egypt knows today, it's also a long struggle. We can't be demoralized by it, but we got to know it's not easy. It doesn't happen in one day. I think the more we can recognition for the justified demands of Egyptian people, that resonates right back here. That's important to do. Solidarity is an extremely important demand to make of our government. So that's
all right. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Great answer. The second question for Dr. Maha Azam. Someone sent it to me in Arabic here, so I'm doing a little bit of translation. Sisi was subject to a lot of condemnation and criticism, and in particular from the country that they are part of, that the Cop27. Do you think that could be a possible way to improve the human rights situation in Egypt or not? Dr. Maazam, that question for you.
Thank you.
Anybody who would like.
In reality, dictators try to ignore pressure, particularly spoken pressure. Sisi, according to many governments, Western governments and policymakers that we have spoken to or communicated with, including the UK government, and we know also the US government, have privately, they say, spoken to Sisi about improvement in the human rights sphere. But we have seen no improvement. What we've seen is continued repression, continued arrests. Even prior to the inauguration of Cop27, people were being stopped, Egyptians were being stopped on the street, their mobiles searched, arrests were constantly happening. A few months prior, Sisi pretended that he was improving his human rights record by releasing some prisoners. But we know full well he was rearresting far more. Agnes Callamard said only recently that where the numbers that were released were perhaps over 600, those rearrested since April 22 reached under 2,000. So what we have is the arrest of almost 3 times the number of those released, and then those released may even be rearrested again. So in reality, we have a dictator that is playing around with the international community, and those democracies that should be putting real pressure on him are not doing so. Let me say, though, that COP27 and these international gatherings, or when Sisi, for example, goes on international visits, and Egyptians and non-Egyptians raise the case of human rights, it is an extremely important process, because what we're doing is slowly and incrementally exposing what is happening in Egypt and saying that the violations are so brutal against ordinary Egyptian citizens who dare to speak out. They have died in prison through slow death, through the denial of medical aid. They have died because of torture. There have been massacres that occurred, as you have pointed to, since 2013, one of the worst massacres in the modern history, or the worst massacre in the modern history of Egypt and Rabaa. So what we're talking about is a dictatorship that is responsible for violations for which they should be standing, those responsible should be standing in front of the International Criminal Court. We're talking about possible crimes against humanity. So raising in quotes, issues regarding human rights is not sufficient. The voices outside, like those raised today, are extremely important, because Egyptians cannot speak out. We have to be the voice of the voiceless. And that's why there was a thank you today from one of the speakers to Egyptians inside, an acknowledgement of the brave Egyptian voices. But I also, as an Egyptian, would like to thank all those outside, human rights organizations and voices like those of yourselves and others who speak out for the Egyptians who cannot speak out. And we have to continue to do so, because even though Sisi has had something of an embarrassing time leading up to COP and today during COP, because there is exposure in some of the Western press, there is exposure through panels like this, through demonstrations that have taken place across the world. The fight has to go on, and it has to go on after COP. We have to ensure that this regime people stand against this regime, all people who respect human rights and believe in freedom for Egyptians. This, again, I stress, is connected to the issue of climate justice. We need people to be free in order to stand up for their rights and also to protect their environment. This is not going to happen in Egypt under a brutal dictatorship. Dictatorship must come to an end in Egypt, and worldwide mobilization of civil society, Egyptians and non-Egyptians, is crucial in the fight against dictatorship. Thank you.
very much. It's a very important tweet right now. It came from German, and I really hope Mustafa Azab is going to put it in the chat. And I really hope that all of you guys, everybody can take that tweet and build on it, because this is one of the questions I was going to ask. First of all, Andrea Praso, Executive Director of the Freedom Former at, yes, it's actually, it's from German, but Human Rights Watch tweeting. And I want to read to you that her tweet, because I think it's very, Mustafa is going to put it there. Germany pledges, that's very important from German, to return to Egypt following COP27 to monitor the human rights situation. Activists fear crackdown once international attention turns away. I did, while you're talking, Dr. Maha, I answered her. I said, thank you, Andrea. It's already happening now. Why you are there to prevent any peaceful demonstration? Can you do anything about it? So Mustafa is going to put that tweet there. And we also can thank the government of Germany to take such an action, because it's already, Sisi is cracking down on the Egyptian right now. As you know, Dr. Maham, everybody in the street right now, they check their phones. If anybody that the police officer feel suspicious about him or her, they take them to prison immediately. We have more than 10,000 in prison right now, at least temporary prison right now, until COP27 is over. Just imagine, after all this country leave the summit, what will happen to the people of Egypt, especially the activists. We really need to build on that, because you and I, as Egyptian, American, Egyptian, British, you know what will happen to those people after the COP27 is over. So I hope Sarah Flounder, Iyad, Congressman James, and everybody here in that call raise their voices out after the COP27. This is something. If you want to comment quick about that before take Iyad, do you have a question for Iyad? Dr. Maha, go for it. I put the tweet over there.
I think this is crucial. This was my call also about a week ago here in London, in again a conference that was held on climate change and human rights, that we have to be vigilant after the end of COP, because these repressive regimes will have named everybody, will have targeted the people that perhaps they could target, but those that they felt that they couldn't target during the conference, they're playing a waiting game. So I believe the repression will unfortunately increase. So it's up to international organizations to be very vigilant, for the United Nations to play its part, and for governments to play their part. As we've seen here, and we've said on many occasions, it is not enough for President Biden and other democratic governments to say we're speaking to Sisi about human rights. There have to be much more serious steps taken in terms of leverage and conditionality, in terms of arms sales, and in terms of supporting the pro-democracy groups and society in Egypt and outside. Otherwise, they are actually enabling the dictatorship, while at the same time trying to cover up for their support. I don't want to undermine the statements that have been made by democratic governments. I welcome what the Germans have said. I hope that they will continue to be vigilant, but we need much more concrete steps in order to undermine not only to release prisoners, but we want to really fight dictatorship that is at the source of human rights violations and the continual arrest of innocent Egyptians.
Thank you, Dr. Maha. Appreciate it. And then Sarah, you can also answer the question later on, but let me give the question to Iyad. How can we, I'm translating while I'm reading the question, how can we support the efforts to stop or eliminate the coordination and cooperation between the two military, with the Egyptian and the military and the security, between the Egyptian and the Americans, according to you as a human rights organization? And this is Iyad, that question for you.
Yes, so I'll speak on the personal level and also on the organizational level as well. So on the personal level, I have to tell you it will be impossible because it's very unfortunate that the United States consider Egypt, regardless of which government is ruling, as a strategic partner to protect the interests of the United States in the region. Now, in terms of the organizational level, I have to tell you that as someone who was the chair of the Arab American Caucus of California Democratic Party, I worked closely with the Progressive Caucus. I worked closely with the Veterans Caucus. I worked closely with the United States Department of Peace, which is an organization on the nonpartisan on the national level to pass some resolutions and voice our concerns to the body of our Democratic Party. And we brought as well environmental justice to the table because these human rights violation sometimes goes against some people who are trying to protect the environment, but however, because we do have the corporations who are producing the fossil fuel, they will try to criminalize them. And as you know, overseas, we don't have that much of jurisdiction, but how the government, they will be treating their own people. Now, in terms of the pressure is on. We are asking our government, especially right now, it's democratic and we have the majority, and I hope we maintain the majority, to make things conditional and not give the military aid to Egypt. But that's on the party level, that's on the activist level. As a human rights activist within the Democratic Party, I'm not alone. There's a lot of people who have that solidarity, and some people who are affected directly because they do have some families in Egypt who's getting affected by all these human rights violations. So in a nutshell, it will be impossible at the moment that the United States break ties with Egypt just for the human rights violation, because this is very unfortunate that there's not that much awareness in the American street about these violation, and it is something. It's not like what Mandela said. Everything seems impossible until someone do it. I wish that's the case, but this is more complicated than what we can do as actors. We can brush our elected officials, as was said earlier. We have to keep them accountable because we are the one who put them in office as voters, as leaders. And I do believe in the bottom-up change. We have been working as grassroots activists on that. We have the ears of the right people, but when it comes to the White House, there is a much bigger power in terms of the lobbying in Washington.
Thank you, Iyad. We put the tweet for Andrea, and we also put the letter, the link. Mustafa Azab, he put the link for the letter that we sent it to Biden with President Biden that been signed by different organizations. And I put my email as well. If anybody want an actual copy of the letter to use it, I can go ahead and email. So just send me an email, and then I'll forward you the press release and the email itself with the PDF form. Very much I wanted to thank Mustafa Azab and his organization for putting this together. And I wanted to thank Dr. Maha, Sarah Flounder, and actually I have Dorothy here. If you allow me two more minutes to add her, she is PDA member, and she introduced me to Congressman Ted Lieu. She's a very activist, and I sent her an invitation right now while we're talking, and she came in. So, Dorothy, do you mind to introduce yourself 2 minutes and give a small talk and let them know who you are? I know her for a very long time. She's also activist, and she's doing a great job. Dorothy, go for it, and then you'll be the last person. Go for it.
You hear me?
Yes, and you can turn the video on if you want to.
Let me see how. Let me see. All right, I'm on my phone, so
Go ahead.
well, it's been an honor to work with Mohammed, and I'm so glad that he's bringing word of what's going on in Egypt to this country, because people focus on
Can you
other.
introduce yourself, Dorothy?
My name is Dorothy Reich. I'm involved with. I'm the president of a club called Progressive Democrats of the Santa Monica Mountains, which is part of Progressive Democrats of America. I've been working with them for 15 years, and we push progressive policies for our government. And one of the progressive policies we push is to end wars and occupations and to end human rights abuses all over the world. We work closely with Code Pink, and I'm just so glad to bring all this information about Egypt. And as horrified as I was that Cop27 was being held in Egypt, in a way, maybe it's some sort of blessing in that it's bringing attention, the world's attention to what's going on there. And people have been focusing on other countries that are more in the news, like Iran, and they haven't been focusing on Egypt. Egypt, always, we think of pharaohs and we think of King Tut and we think of the pyramids, and we don't realize what's actually going on on the ground in Egypt. So it's very, very important, and I'm glad that I was able to bring this to the attention of the liberal and progressive community in America. And I just point out, as I always do, that America is in the business of manufacturing arms and selling them, and it's very hard to break that. We're working on it all the time. We're complaining, but it's money. The lobbyists own this country, and we have to. Sorry about that. I got a call in, and that was Alan Minsky actually calling Mohammed. So we just, the way they do it, the arms manufacturers, they put a little piece of each weapon in each state, so that when elected officials vote against manufacturing weapons, they're voting against jobs in their state and maybe even their community. So it's a very difficult job, but we're trying so hard, and it breaks my heart to see that my country depends on the sale of weapons for a large part of its economy. It's wrong, and we have to break out of that. And hopefully this, what's going on in Egypt and these calls and the calls for help will help us in that effort. So thank you very much for asking me to speak.
Thank you, Dorothy. I always honored to work with you as well. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Again, thanks for all of you guys, and thank you, Mustafa Azab, for putting this together. Thank you. We hope to see you guys again later on. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
2078. Okay. And I'm gonna go pick up these 10 pages.
Mhm.